I've never made one of these before, and I'm about to attempt to remake it from scratch. I'm talking about this, the solid colored backgrounds, the semi 2D text with bold outlines, and of course, the iconic moving chevrons in the background. If you've ever dabbled even a little in 2D intros, you've probably tried this style before. Over the years, creators have gone in lots of different directions with this, bringing their own additions into the mix, but the core style is still one of the most popular 2D intro styles, just in general. Why is this style so insanely popular? It's literally everywhere if you search for 2D intros. Well, back in 2019, none other than the HOLYFX blessed us with this tutorial, showing us some clever techniques for making this style in Clipmaker 2, cementing their place in Clipmaker lore, and people are still using them to this day. I did actually watch this video at some point, but it's been years, and today, there's no time for tutorials. I'm going to try to use Panzoid Gen 4 to remake one of HOLYFX's most popular intros, and try my hand at this 2D style for the very first time. To reiterate, I'm not an intro maker. I've only ever actually completed a handful of intros in my life. One of them, you might have seen if you watched the last video, was this Galaxy Ninja HD remake. Yeah, baby steps. And a long time ago, I made those original templates that came with CM2, if anybody remembers those. So basically, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I do know my way around Gen 4. I did make it after all. Can I use my knowledge of Gen 4 to recreate one of the most iconic 2D styles ever? I need all the help I can get, so for this intro, I prepared a top secret weapon to hopefully give me the edge that I need to tackle this challenge. The first thing I like to do before I start a remake is to open up the original and figure out how this creation was made, and also just appreciate the creator's work. I know this is CM2 and it's an older creation, but there are still a lot of cool things going on here. Before the intro even starts, we're greeted with this tiny little square shaking around. Now this might not seem like much, and most people wouldn't even notice it, but true CM2 fans know exactly what this is. In CM2, the easiest and most common way to make something disappear was just to make it super tiny. Scale only goes down to 0.001, so that's as small as it could get. If you get up really close, you can see that our little mystery square here is actually the particles, just really small. You can also see the text over there too, it's just so little you can barely notice it. If you really wanted, you could toggle their groups off or, just move them off the screen so they can't be seen, but then of course you lose that charming CM2 vibe of having tiny little artifacts in your intro. Okay, starting with the actual intro now. The little particle explosion at the beginning is a nice touch, it's like an intro to an intro. And then everything else just explodes in. The green screen opening here is actually done with a massive 3D donut shape and not with a shutter effect, which is a more common way to do this kind of circular wipe. I can't help but wonder if that was a sort of CM2 era flex. Like, you're not gonna believe this, but I was able to get the particles on top of the shutter. I love that synergy of creators constantly one-upping each other's styles, coming up with creative new techniques, and pushing the boundary for intro design, and if nothing else, just to leave everyone stumped as to how they did it. Especially in CM2, for how relatively simple it is, people have come up with so many creative ways to use it. Speaking of creative techniques, look at this text. Here we have no fewer than 7 different text objects all layered together to create the different text effects. All the text objects are also put inside multiple groups with different scales that create that classic 2D 3D depth effect. The white text behind everything has its render side set to back and is carefully positioned to appear as though it's actually a 2D outline around the text. It's not quite perfect just because, inevitably when you view it from slightly different angles, the illusion starts to break down, but it works surprisingly well and it's a really clever technique. Alright, it's time to talk about the chevrons. So the basic idea is that you take 2 big rectangles and you put them right next to each other. Then, you get an image of a stripy zigzag pattern and you put it on both rectangles so it creates a mirrored image. We call them the chevrons because they look like a chevron symbol. You have to rotate the rectangles just slightly into a V shape so they cross at the center point. This way, you can animate them scrolling back into the background to create the movement effect. You can animate them moving at different speeds or spinning around or whatever you want, it's really up to the animator. You notice how as I move the camera around, the rectangles keep flickering in and out with the background, and the center where they meet is just super glitchy? That's a phenomenon called Z-fighting, and it happens when you're rendering 2 surfaces in 3Ds that are so close to each other that your GPU is actually having trouble deciding which one is closer. This isn't necessarily CM2's fault, it's just one of the troublesome parts of trying to create 2D graphics in 3D space like this. So how do you get a chevron image? Well, you either need to download one that someone has already made, or you can make one yourself, for example in an image editing program like Photoshop. Or, as you're about to see, you could just make one in Gen 4. I think I've seen everything I need for now. It's time to slap this remake together. If your first instinct was to create a 3D scene and add a shape for the background, you'd be wrong. I'm sorry, Gen 4 just might be too hard for you. Okay, I'm kidding, of course. You could absolutely add a 3D shape, but in Gen 4 it's just much easier to drop a solid color on the timeline for our background. Since we're going to have a lot of 2D elements in this intro, it's better to just use 2D workflows. And on the topic of 2D workflows, I thought I'd change up things a little and have a go at making this text in 2D instead of 3D. It's a great fit for this intro style. It allows me to explore some different workflows in Gen 4. That image on the text in the original is pretty cool, but I'm thinking of doing something a little more dynamic. So I created a scene with some square particles in it that are just kind of floating up. Then I just overlaid it on top of the text to create this really nice animated texture effect. We recently had a discussion thread going about different techniques for styling 2D text. Shoutouts to those people. I think they'll find this next part really interesting. The first thing I did is add an outline to the text. I just increased the stroke size here. Then, to give it some depth, I used the repeat transform effect. This effect takes a regular transform effect and applies it a bunch of times, merging each step into one final result. This is a perfect way to make our depth effect. It just creates a bunch of copies of the text where each one is slightly smaller. Then we add a color overlay to make it just a little darker than the outline. The final part is to add an outline around everything. I ended up using an outline node for this, but I'll probably add this as a preset effect at some point if you want to use an effect style workflow instead. This is looking pretty close now, but I wanted to give it a little bit of 3D perspective. Like how in CM2, the text is usually tilted and scaled back slightly using different groups. A 3D transform would work here, but I was feeling kind of adventurous, so I actually took the whole thing and I put it on an object in a 3D scene. This way I could make slight transformations in 3D to get it looking just how I wanted. Now it's done, and honestly, I was a little unsure about how it would turn out at first, but I think it looks great. A super clean 2D look that suits this intro really well. As I was starting to make the intro cube animation, I noticed that in the original, each one of those little triangles is an individually animated object. The absolute madman. Now I'm aware that this is pretty much nothing compared to some of the insane brute force animations that people have made in CM2 and in CM3 with literally thousands of objects. I have massive respect for the determination of creators that painstakingly animated each individual letter in the days before text effectors, especially when it's an intro for someone with 10 letters in their name. But here in Gen 4, we're trying to make things easier, and also, I'm just way too lazy, so I'm going to use particles instead. Gen 4's new particle system isn't quite ready yet, so I can't show it off in this video, but for this little Doritos explosion, the good old Gen 3 particles should do just fine. Now the wire almost tripped me up. It is a 3D effect after all. There's a spiral coming out toward the screen, but how can I fit this into my 2D workflow? In the original, there's a rectangle in the background that the wire goes through and it kind of emerges out of, but if I do it just like that, then the rectangle will be covering all the layers underneath it. There are probably a few different ways you could solve this, but I think the way I did it is a bit unconventional. I adjusted the far plane of the camera for the wire scene. This basically means that nothing will be rendered past this distance from the camera. That way, I can make it look like there's an invisible wall that the wire is coming out of, even though there's nothing actually there. When you put it together with everything else, it's a pretty clever and convincing way to combine 3D elements with 2D. Alright, and here it is, the final render. I'm really happy with everything. It was really fun to try to make this iconic intro style, and if I can say so, I think I nailed it. Though, now that I'm watching it, there is something about it that feels a little bland. I don't know, maybe it just needs something. Maybe some stripes, or perhaps a sunburst. I think it's finally time to break out the new Chevrons preset. This is a node-based preset, so to add it, find the Chevron node and drop it on the timeline. Then we'll just connect a pattern node as its input. This is how you can define a repeating pattern that will create your chevrons. You can build your patterns by combining colors, dashes, and gradients. Once you design a pattern, you can change the chevron properties like the angle and the scale, and by checking the mirror option and animating the X offset, you can easily make the classic chevron scroll effect. Unlike before where chevrons were just static images or imported videos if you were ambitious, you can use this preset to customize and animate your chevrons right in your project. It's a lot simpler than lining up rectangles. This time around, I'm only going to be recreating the chevron pattern from the original intro, but there are tons of crazy patterns that are possible with this, and not just chevrons. Also, I'm not going to get deep into nodes in this video, but you can connect different nodes together and create all kinds of things with this. For the effects, I mostly just replicated the look of the original, but I also added this modified bloom effect. I wanted to make things pop out just a little more, and this is exactly what I was looking for. It's like regular bloom, but instead of making things glow based on how bright they are, it uses saturation, so everything that's colorful gets bloom. I played around with the blending modes and it produced some pretty cool looking effects, but I didn't want to completely change the look of things, so I dialed it back a little. Oh, and I almost forgot, the final touch. That little shaking square at the beginning. Being a faithful remake, it would be rude not to include this. Frankly, I can't say for sure whether it wasn't intentional. Surely HOLYFX would have at least noticed that it was there, and I have no doubt that he would have been able to remove it if he wanted to. And it's kind of grown on me at this point. It's like this mysterious little dot, what could that be? And then it blows up into a cube. This intro just wouldn't be the same without it. And with that, here's the final result, for real this time. I'll leave a link to this project as well as the original in the description. There are a ton of interesting techniques that you'll find in this project that I couldn't go into in the video, so give it a try and have a look for yourself. Gen 4 runs right in your browser. If you have any questions about the remake or the new Chevrons preset, leave a comment or head over to our community on Panzoid.com, where I'll be posting more details and tips on how to make your own. Give this video a like so I know you want to see more remakes, and consider becoming a Panzoid subscriber to support the site, as well as to receive great benefits like cloud storage for your assets. Thanks to Dark Arts for suggesting this remake, thanks to HOLYFX for the creation, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.